All right, well, I'm really excited for our next speaker. Our next speaker is Tom Hegen from Germany. And Tom is an amazing aerial photographer. He does some pretty incredible stuff with our cameras. And so without further ado, please welcome Tom Hegen to the stage.
Thanks. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, New York. Thanks for the introduction. My name is Tom Hegen. I'm a photographer from Germany, specialized in aerial photography. And for the next 30 minutes or so, I will give you a very nice treatment in English with beautiful German accent. So I hope you can follow me. If not, just shout your hands up and ask questions if you have. All right, and I'm going to show you some of my aerial photo projects I did over the last couple of years. So let's start. So the work I do is based on the concept of Anthropocene. It's a term used by scientists saying that we as a human era are kind of like not living in the actual human Earth's era, the Holocene, because we are stepping into a new human era, the Anthropocene. And what it basically says is that we as humans have become the most important factor influencing our planet. And to give some examples, humans are responsible for climate change. We are responsible for loss of biodiversity, and we are responsible for mass extinction. And actually, every single one of us is part of that Anthropocene because we all eat the crops that we grow in our fields. We all live in buildings that are made out of rocks, made out of steel, made out of glass or sand. We drive on roads that are made out of rocks. We heat those buildings using fossil fuels. And so on. And for our high living standards, all those resources, they need to come from some places. For example, the first image I'm going to show you here, it's a copper mine in Arizona, where miners extract copper that we use for wires, for music instruments, for kitchen tools, for example, or for pipes. And so as an aerial photographer, I actually try to focus on the traces that we leave on our planet's surface, and I try to give insights on how we interfere with nature. And I always work in set of images. It's like a series of, let's say, 10 to 20 images about a specific topic, and some of those series I would like to show you now. So the first project I'm going to show you is about salt and mineral extraction at the Great Salt Lake in Utah. I was there last year, and may some of you know, I guess, the Great Salt Lake has a very high salt concentration. In some parts, the salt concentration is 30 times higher than in the ocean. And mining companies along the shores of the lake extract minerals from salt evaporation ponds, as you see here in this first image. So what happens here is that salty water gets collected into huge ponds, and in those ponds the salt water evaporates by sunshine and by wind, and the salt concentration in the water increases. And in the water there's microbacteria, and the bacteria proliferates or increases when the salt concentration increases, and they start to change their color. It's kind of like a natural sunblock to prevent sunburn of the bacteria. That's where the color in those photographs come from. So each pond actually gives a different indication of salinity, and the colors in the pools, they can change from like a pale green to a vibrant red. And I often get also asked how much editing is done on those photographs. I mean, for sure, I shoot in RAW format, and I have to develop my photos. I have to do contrasts and saturation and so on. But when you go on Google and when you look for those locations, for example, the Great Salt Lake, you will see that those places, landscapes exist as they are here in the photographs. Okay, so once the water is completely evaporated, the salt crust is carefully harvested from the pond surface. It's usually a layer about maybe like 10 centimeters thick, and then collected and processed in factories. Just recently, in March this year, I went to a trip to Senegal in Africa and documented some more traditional practices of salt production. So the next set of images is from Senegal, and it's completely different to what we've seen in the first couple of images. It was much more industrial, and here people work with like very basic tools. They just work with their pure hands, and what they do is they dig shallow ponds on the shore of a river that is connected to the ocean, so it's a salty river, and they collect all the salt water in the ponds again, and then it's the same process from solar evaporation. The water evaporates and leaves a salt crust in the ponds, and then the salt workers come and harvest the salt crust and carry it with donkeys. Maybe you see it here in the middle of this frame. They have like donkeys and small wooden trailers where they shuffle all the salt on and carry it to the next town. So it's very tense labor. It's super humid and super hot, and only super basic tools are available in this area. So what I find really fascinating about this aerial perspective is that it reveals something that we are not able to see from the ground. So all those structures, those canals, and especially like in this image, you see different stages of the salt ponds. In some ponds, the salt is collected in piles. Other ponds, there's still brine water in them. Or here in the bottom right part of the image, there's a caravan going into the salt field, taking the salt out of the field. And this really is only possible to see from the aerial perspective. So the level of information in aerial photography is quite high. And I try to make use of that and try to tell visual stories with this perspective. Okay, so this photograph also looks quite abstract, but shows a completely different interference with nature. We all have smartphones in our pocket, and when we charge those smartphones and we put the charger into the socket, the power that we take may have been generated from what we see here. That's brown coal mining in Germany. And here, for example, a comparison. You see in the top part of the image, there's like a white dot in the middle of this excavator. And those are apparently some of the biggest machines produced in the world. This excavator has a size of about 200 meters, so it's just massive what they move in this area. Coal is still one of the most energy suppliers worldwide. And it has really bad consequences. For example, here in Germany, huge landscapes are changed. People lose their homes because they're relocated. When you have bad luck, your village is right above one of those coal areas, and then the government comes and relocates you. And I'm not talking about 1950 or 1900. It happens even today, which is ridiculous, I would say. So people lose their homes, and for sure when we burn all that fossil fuels, we release a lot of carbon dioxide into the air. To give you another number, around 2022, so today, every third battery charge or every third use of electric energy is coming from coal energy. And it doesn't matter if it's for smartphones or for electric cars, for example, which are sold as like a green solution. So I think we always have to keep that in mind when we try to adapt to a new technique, that we have to look at the entire lifespan of a product or where the energy is coming from. I was also looking in what happens when coal burns. So coal never burns completely. There are always some remains. And this coal ash usually is collected in huge ponds to prevent air pollution. And then the ponds are enriched with chemicals to kind of like bind the coal ash. And that's actually where the colors in those photographs come from. So it's a mix, like a slurry much of coal ash and those chemicals. And another aspect of my work is it's kind of like beautiful, and it almost has like a painterly quality to it. And I really like to work with this visual quality and also with abstraction, and I try to show ugly places in a rather beautiful way. And in this way, I hope to get the viewer's attention to topics they may not be interested in otherwise. So I guess you could also say it's kind of like seduction, because when you engage with the image at first glance, you're kind of like attracted to it. But when you read the story behind it, you start to see those places with completely new eyes. And here again is one of those details I'm trying to include in a lot of images. In the center frame, you have an excavator. And when you think about like a real size excavator, you know how big they are. Then you have a reference of how huge those ash ponds are. So those images were shot in Poland. Okay, but since a couple of years, different energy sources were on rise. And this image, it shows a high tower which is surrounded by more than 10,000 giant mirrors. What happens here is that the sun's energy is concentrated to the middle of the tower, and in the end, electricity turbines are driven with steam. So this image here is from an experimental solar power plant in the Nevada desert. I was there 2021, so last year, and actually I have to say, this is a power plant that was like a pilot project, and it's not running anymore because its efficiency was too low. But I think we need those kind of solutions and practices to see where we have new ways and new methods of collecting energy for the future. So for me, even when this project failed, it's no reason to give up, because there are other projects, for example in California, that are very successful. So this is, for example, the Ivanpah solar power plant just south of Las Vegas, and it has like 3 plants, which you see in here, and it produces electricity for 140,000 households in the United States. Okay, so we go from California heat to the Arctic cold. The next project is shot in Greenland and on the Arctic ice sheet. And when you think about the Arctic ice sheet, I have to say it's not like a seamless plane of ice. The Arctic, or the ice cap, contains thousands of rivers on the ice surface and meltwater lakes through which meltwater flows over the ice, passes through the ice, and flows towards the ocean. Usually the bright surface reflects most of the sun's energy. But when the ice starts to melt, darker land and water becomes visible. So at the dark spots, less solar energy is reflected and more ice can melt. And that again creates even more dark spots and even more ice can melt. So once this process starts, it's kind of like accelerating by itself. And to give you another number, scientists around the world, they estimate that the world's oceans will rise up to 60 centimeters by the end of this century. And this will cause a really big problem for about 1/5 of the world population who live in coastal areas. And I mean, when we are in Manhattan here now, and Manhattan has the same problem here as well over the next decades, I would say. So this project is a very good example that the Arctic, they don't care if we extract and eat sea salt, but those places do care where we get our energy from, either from coal, burning coal, or from the sun to charge smartphones again, or electric vehicles. Okay, just want to give you a short behind the scenes of how I shoot my projects. So what I do, I use either helicopters, I use small airplanes or paragliders, like this one here in Mexico, and I also make use of drones. I always have the same camera system from Fujifilm with me. It doesn't matter if I'm in a helicopter or I'm using drones. And I always say that technique is never important for me. For me, it's only about image quality, about the result, and about the story behind the image. And those vehicles are just tools for me to be able to move my camera in three-dimensional space. The next video is a short making of the Arctic project. Okay, so in this photograph you can see how one of the most important resources for rechargeable batteries is extracted. These are some of the biggest lithium fields in the world. Those are in the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. So what happens here is that groundwater, it's a kind of brine, is pumped into huge pools on the surface. And then water again evaporates and the lithium concentration in those ponds increases. From the turquoise ponds, which you see in the middle of the frame, to the yellow ponds, so this from turquoise to yellow is one production line for lithium. It takes around 1 year. And to extract 1 ton of lithium, it takes around 2 billion liters of fresh water. So the amount of water consumption in those areas is insane. And when you think about a standard Tesla car, it includes about 12 kilograms of lithium. So that's what I'm saying. Rechargeable batteries are important, but we also need to see the connections where the resources for those batteries come from, how they're extracted, and what effects it may have on other countries. And because of that, I think we cannot just go to other countries, exploit their resources. We should always stay open to maybe new and better solutions. Okay, another factor for the next century will be our ever-growing world population. So in the 1950s, there were about 2.5 billion people on the planet. Today, we are almost 8 billion, and the United Nations predict that by the end of this century, so in like 80 years, we will be 10 billion people on the planet. And one of the biggest challenges amongst climate change and the scarce of resources is the ever-growing world population and how we are going to feed this world population. So in the Netherlands, there is a group of farmers who experiment with alternative ways of food production. And what they do, they build those greenhouses, and in those greenhouses they have constant temperature, they have constant humidity, and they also use artificial light to kind of like produce perfect environment for growing crops. And they can do it all year round. So even in winter, and this project was shot in March in winter, they are able to grow the crops on with very limited resources on very small space. And they also store the crops on multiple levels. So sometimes it's like 8 layers of crops in those greenhouses just to save space. And again, I think when we look at the growing world population, we need to think about new solutions of how we will keep feeding the world, and also how we can use our limited resources to maximize food production. Okay, so this is the next project. I already tell you in the top left corner there's a blue dot. It's a tractor, and this tractor gives again scale of the entire landscape. So less resources, less land, and more droughts. And in Europe, actually this year we had a lot of droughts. They will force us to think about alternative food production in desert areas. And I found this place in central Spain, which is kind of like a desert area. And what the people do here, they practice, it's so-called dryland farming. So what they do, they only like grow crops on those fields during winter time when irrigation, like natural irrigation, rainfall is just enough. And also heat is not as bad as in summer. So in autumn they start to seed the fields, and then they grow the crops during winter time. And in springtime they start to harvest those fields just before the big heat comes again. It's an area where you don't think any crop or any plant would grow, but they try to use like those very limited resources and still build those fields into the hills of those landscapes. And the fields are always kind of like organized in terraces to collect the water and to keep the water for longer time on the fields. This image again, along the path you see 3 wind turbines who again give a scale of this landscape because it's really abstract and it almost looks like a Picasso quality painting, I would say. Okay, here's another making of this series. Okay, now I just quickly want to talk about a project I shot 2 years ago at the beginning of Corona pandemic. And the story behind this book project is that when you think about globalization, the aviation industry is probably the biggest motor of globalization. And only due to our massively globalized world, this coronavirus were able to spread around the globe within a couple of days or weeks. So if we wouldn't have this like globalization, it may have never reached Europe or America, but we have the situation, and so diseases can spread within days or weeks all around the globe. And one of the biggest factors in my eyes are also the aviation industry, because I was flying in a couple of days ago from Germany to New York just within 8 hours, and I will fly back tonight again. So we are really connected, and there are no real distances on our planet anymore. But at the same time, the airline industries were one of the biggest losers, or let's say this industry was one that suffered the most from the pandemic, because at airports around the world, all airplanes were grounded, everything was in like a freeze state, everything was in lockdown. And so what happened, at least in Germany, in Europe, and I also know that it happened in the United States, airlines used the landing tracks and all the airfields to park their grounded airplanes. And when we were in the first weeks of pandemic, I thought it's very interesting, also very ironic that like those places, airports, the aviation industry, where usually there's a lot of movement, like we're now the biggest loser, and I wanted to find like a symbolic image of the coronavirus. So I started to fly over like all the closed airports in Germany and documented this like very awkward situation. And when I photographed at the first airport in Frankfurt, I also noticed that there's a strangely beautiful graphic quality on all airports. When you have like all the signage, when you have the architecture and the airplanes, it almost looks like a computer-generated image. And I studied graphic design, and you may have noticed on my images that they're like they have very graphic quality. I work a lot with lines, with rectangles, and try to be very accurate with framing. And for me, this was kind of like a visual playground. And so in 2022, in April, I photographed the 6 largest airports in Germany and made this book. A couple of slides ago, you have seen the cover of this book. And I mean, I probably would have never done that project. This was only due to Corona, and I had completely different projects planned at this time. But for sure, I mean, no one could move around, so I was quite happy to come up with this idea, and I found it really amazing. And also, if I would ask today at an airport if I can fly over there, they probably would never let me do that, because airports are super busy airspace, and when a photographer comes and says he wants to fly with a helicopter between those airfields, it's, I would say, almost impossible. Okay, here's another making of. Okay, I think I quickly need to speed up a little bit, but I'm almost done. So the last project I'm showing you is a project I've been fortunate enough to shoot with the new XH2 in Namibia a couple of weeks ago. So Fujifilm gave me this camera, and they wanted to kind of like challenge me about the image quality. I'm usually shooting with their medium format systems with super high resolution, so I'm very spoiled with image quality, and I usually do large scale prints of my work. And I wanted to see how this camera can hold up against the medium format system. So we took it on a couple of flights across really spectacular landscapes of Namibia. And I mean, I have to say, I was really surprised about the image quality when you think about sensor size, which is significantly smaller than the medium format, and also resolution, lenses. I mean, the GFX system is just on a different level, I would say. But this is a fairly big screen, and when you look at the images, how the camera renders shadows and lights, I was really amazed about it, I have to say. So I just give you some impressions of Namibia here. And maybe also worth mentioning is the low light performance or ISO performance. I mean, you have seen in the videos that I always shoot handheld from moving objects. So I never have this privilege to put my camera on a tripod and to have like a slow shutter speed. And I was able to crank up the ISO to at least 3200 or maybe even to 6.4. Which gives me freedom again to have like kind of like fast shutter speed and still get like tech sharp images. Okay, so this is the last video behind the scenes of how we shot this project, and yeah.
My eyes are trained on visual references. I studied graphic design. It was a deep dive into the world of arts and filling a blank page with creative ideas. I learned how to use color, texture, shapes, or contrasts to express meaningful stories. I learned how to think in pictures, and actually, I learned how to see. At the same time, I became interested in photography. What attracted me was the immediate result of my imagination. I started to read landscapes as a painter. It felt like seeing the world with new eyes. And then, I had my first flight on an airplane. A window seat. It was like a visual explosion. The Earth's surface rolled out like an artfully designed carpet with no beginning or end. Insanely abstract, but extremely real. This perspective had such beautiful graphic quality that it reminded me of my time when I was still working as a designer. At that moment, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. Aerial photography gave me creative freedom to choose my own perspective on things. I started to tell visual stories we all had a connection to. Because we are all sharing the same home. And today, every time I'm up in the air, I learn something new about the world we all live in.
Thank you. I'm almost done. I just hope that like this short presentation gave some insight into the work I do, and I actually hope that it also contributes in a way to moving into the future and into a better planet. And I think we as photographers, visual storytellers and creatives, we can contribute to a pool of information that can help to move the society into a better world. And I also hope that people understand that we shouldn't take all resources that we have on our planet for granted, and that we should be more respectful to nature, to resources and to our planet. And I actually would like to close down with this image I shot 2 days ago over New York City. And I thought it was just fantastic being here, and I thank very much Fujifilm for inviting me. Thank you so much.